What is going on, Tentacrew? My name is Billy the Squid, and today I want to go over, does Elden Ring need FP Regen? This is a video that I did a couple weeks ago, and we had some good comments, we had some good discussions down in the comments about this subject, and I kind of just want to give a follow-up to that video, because y'all seemed very interested, but either one way or the other when it came to FP Regen in Elden Ring. And we also finally have the network test available, so we can see the game in what it's currently looking like. And in the FP Regen department, that is a no. Big nope skis on FP Regen, at least right now in Elden Ring. I highly doubt it will change, but it's not, the game's not out yet, so anything is subject to change. Also, before we get too far into the video, I just wanted you guys to know that since I did not get into the network test of Elden Ring, I'm going to be borrowing some footage from the content creators that I tend to enjoy in the Souls-like genre. Today, we're going to be watching through Vadi videos behind me while we go over these comments. If they have any issues with me using these, I will happily take them down. But anyway, let's get into y'all's comments, because like I said, it was pretty back and forth about either liking it or not liking it. And some of you had some pretty creative ways that we could implement a system for FP Regen, or a system that makes FP more viable that wasn't necessarily FP Regen. So let's hop right on into it. My guess is they don't want people waiting for mana. For example, let's say I'm playing through the game for the first time. I'm in the middle of a level and all out of Estus and mana. Instead of progressing through the level, I just wait for my mana so that I can cast a miracle, which will heal me. Now imagine I have to do this 5 times before reaching the next checkpoint. That would be boring as hell, and FromSoftware acknowledges that. This is extremely, extremely true. I've been playing through the Cinders mod recently, which got me on the track of FP Regen and kind of wanting it in the game. And I have actually found myself doing this. I have a ring in Cinders that anytime I kill something, I get a chunk of FP back. So that's really nice. But in like big encounters or boss encounters, since I am doing a magic only run, no weapon whatsoever, I have been finding myself just kind of standing around waiting for my mana to regen, especially if I need a quick heal and I don't want to burn an Estus, because Estus is more useful in the middle of combat because it's quicker. There is a waiting game that happens. This comment is 100% valid, and I understand if this was part of the decision FromSoftware made in not bringing Elden Ring FP Regen. This is just a very hard disagree for me. All this does is trivialize the caster playstyle even further and removing the catch of basically managing a resource. Even the older titles had limited spell usage, so now having unlimited FP just lets you cheese through PvE. But PvE aside, congrats, the PvP is now immediately broken. Every person I saw talking about this has not mentioned that healing miracles exist in these games, so everyone just has unlimited heals now? You can't really be serious about this, do you guys? Just imagine for 1 sec how much of a mess the PvP becomes if the magic system stays the same just with unlimited FP. Everyone is just going to be using Homing Soul Mass to completely shut down any aggressive playstyle one might have, and just spam that spell. Even if somehow some meta lord manages to get damage on you, you can just heal under the protection of Soul Mass and couple that strategy with just the most boring passive playstyle you can imagine, and watch the PvP scene turn into an absolute shit show for anyone who dares to play online. This would be the worst case scenario in Dark Souls 3, but it would still highly encourage even more of a passive playstyle, and the winner in a PvP fight would be the person who doesn't starve, die of pure boredom, or fall asleep. I would like to see a better magic system too, but having unlimited FP on its own just breaks the game from a PvP perspective immediately, and removes just a bit of resource management from the PvE perspective, which is at worst a mild inconvenience for the player. There's a lot to unpack in this comment, and given how Elden Ring is looking and all the footage I've seen, this has a lot of value to it. For one, in the PvE sense, yes, everybody having unlimited heals, it would make it so that your resource management is a little bit lessened. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't see much of a downside in a PvE sense, other than potentially having unlimited heals. But the PvP sense, and especially the way invasions work right now, which we're going to get to in a later video, but there's effectively an item that lets a invader exit a fight. So if that item remains the way it is in the game, you can exit a fight, heal with your FP regen, and then go back into a fight completely free for whatever reason. And if there's not a hard limit to the amount of this item, which I think it's 10 right now, fights can drag on a lot longer than they need to. And I get it. I get what you're going to say. The person being invaded and their group would effectively have the same thing. If somebody's exiting a fight and regenning, healing, all that stuff, the person fighting is going to have the same thing. But do we really want 20 plus minutes of having the same dude in our world harassing us, exiting, healing, wash, rinse, repeating? I really don't think so. And it could be a easy way for invaders to grief players, especially if this locks like certain areas out. It's just hard to tell. Mana 1000% should regen. Your attacks as a mage should not be a resource that can fully deplete. It would make the game just overall better, since mages in all base games suck since they can run out of attacks. Yes and no. I do agree that a pure caster playstyle is not exactly super viable in these games. You can make it work with proper stat allocation and stuff like that, but I get what you're saying in that. But I don't think that's honestly the intention FromSoftware has with the mage playstyle. I think Magic is always going to play more of a supplemental route in these games. They want you to have a weapon, and they give you all of the tools available to be able to use a magically imbued weapon or anything like that to supplement a caster playstyle. I don't think they really want pure casters being it. Now, that being said, Elden Ring seems to have made it even easier for casters to have weapons that scale properly. It looks like imbuing weapons with magic properties is just like a toggle. You can either swap it freely from physical to magic as long as you have the resource available to do that, and you can go back and forth with it. It doesn't seem like it's a pure lock-in type mechanic, which I think is good for magic-oriented character builds. It could work like Sekiro's spirit emblems, where kills give you FP. I do like this idea. I like this idea quite a bit. The only issue I see with it is, one, it would make boss fights, unless the boss has mobs with them, you would still run out of mana in that regard. Again, Sekiro had that, but Sekiro also didn't have a PvP scene. And in a PvP-oriented system, this would be a massive nerf to invaders. And I understand FromSoftware wants invaders to lose. And again, we're going to cover PvP more in a later video. But given that the host and his phantoms would be able to regen FP, but the invader wouldn't be given the option unless the host pops like a seed of the giant tree or something like that, like some equivalent to that, it would make invaders that rely on FP have a resource that just goes away. And this might not be a bad thing, considering you're only going to be able to invade into co-op unless somebody has a specific item turned on. And if you kill one of the phantoms, you do get flasks back. You get 1 heal flask and 1 mana flask from what I saw. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that kind of incentivizes the invader to be more of the aggressor and gives a more risk-reward playstyle, which I think is appropriate. But I do see where this could be good for a PvE fix, because it will still make bosses difficult while also giving you more resources for the multitudes of mobs that the open world has. But the PvP, I think this is where that would struggle. Why is swinging my pure melee club differently tied to a magic stat? We went over this one a little bit in the comments. We had a good back and forth about this. My mindset on it was the weapon arts and stuff, for instance, a club. If you're not putting any points into magic or whatnot, and you want to use the weapon art for like a great club or something like that, there are certain benefits that you get from using the weapon art. As most of you probably know, poise does not really work in a PvE sense. Most enemies will knock you out of an animation. It's a mechanic to make it so that you can't just poise cheese the entire game, and poise only really affects PvP. Given that, a lot of the weapon arts will give you hyper armor and poise in a way. So I feel like that's kind of the benefit for having a cost to reward basis for these different attacks with the pure physical weapons. I feel like there is a benefit to having them, whether it's wanting to tank through attacks, have hyper armor, maybe put a status effect on an enemy like a pancake or whatnot. And I understand that some regular R1s and R2s and charged R2s can affect enemies in this way, but I do feel like the weapon arts do deserve to keep being tied to the blue bar. I think weapon art spam would be probably more toxic in PvP, or at least equally as toxic as magic spam if an FP regen system did happen. Or if we didn't have an FP regen system and then it's just free weapon art spam. Weapon arts would be meta, and I don't think anybody would really like a spin to win meta. Mana regen equals infinite resource. Goes against the idea of limited resources at the game's beginning, especially considering healing miracles would make that struggle vanish. Besides, it already exists with infusions. In Dark Souls 3, yes, it exists with infusions. It is a very slow regen, but it does exist. We have yet to see if anything like that exists in Elden Ring. From the network test, there has not been such an item. I do believe crafting could be the answer to this, where going through, gathering up resources, making craftables that will increase your mana regen, or just give you a burst of mana, kind of like the spices from Demon Souls. I think that could be the answer for mana costs in Elden Ring. Also, I just kind of want to touch on, for a majority of the spells and weapon arts, mana costs are surprisingly low. It does seem like they are wanting people to be able to use more spells and more weapon arts. It seems like the costs are low, and the mana that you get back, or the FP you get back from the blue flask, is a lot more than what it was in Dark Souls 3. It seems like they start you off with a much better resource. I would say yes, but only if it was a very weak regen, so it would not impact PvP. We've kind of brought up the PvP instance with this, and I do see the validity in having that concern. But I feel like too weak of a regen in general would trivialize it and make it not any more worth. Because, like we said in the earlier comment, it would just lead to people waiting around. And the longer you have to wait, the worse that it would be. So a very weak regen, I feel like, would almost be null. They should just not have the regen and give more sources like consumables to regen itself. Everything could be way better for PvP. Elden Ring was probably made more fantastical for magical freedom and improvement. Apparently this delay is among this very concept in for PvP. I wouldn't be surprised if they'd compose a magically based game in contrast to Sekira's sneak mechanics. It's almost as if they'll keep improving. This comment was kind of all over the place. I do enjoy the enthusiasm and happiness that this person had. I did not hear that the delay for Elden Ring being pushed back a month was due specifically for mana and PvP. I did have some rumblings that I heard that the PvP system in general was the reason for the delay. I heard that they were concerned with invaders and how that whole system was going to work. And this network test is very much in the need for, like, fine-tuning that system. I just hope that skills won't use any FP unless they shoot projectiles. This would be an interesting one. I've already kind of went into why I think most weapon arts in the games need to have an FP tie, because there are status effects that both you and the enemy get that make it worth. But from what I'm seeing in Elden Ring, honestly, most of the weapon art type things do have some sort of magical or projectile benefit, whether it buffs your weapon afterwards. There's very few that I've seen that are just raw weapon art talents. So this could have potentially worked, but in that same vein, it kind of gives weapon arts the ability to be more fantastical, and then you can tie more of the niche, like physical moves, to charged R2s, R1 combos, which now have finite amounts of uses. You can't just R1 spam. There is combo finishers that leave you open, and power stancing. So I think you're kind of getting that with the weapon arts in this game, but only time will tell. I would say no. Mana regen would ruin the suspense of clutching a win with no resources and a lackluster melee weapon early game. Now, one game that does have mana regen is Blasphemous, but it also comes with 50% less melee damage, and you lose MP and health if you are hit. It is also a New Game Plus feature as well, so it isn't even an initially intended way of beating the game. So overall, I would say no unless they want to make a wimpy weapon that is only meant to refill a small amount of focus per hit and nothing more. Just my opinions though. Feel free to criticize as you see fit. And as I commented back, criticizing is not my bag, baby! But I do like the idea of having a weapon, or maybe a certain enchantment style of weapon, where it completely neuters the damage that you're going to put out, but each attack will regen your mana so that you're able to cast more spells. This is a really neat way of, in a both PvE and PvP sense, balancing out a mana regen system where you actually have to actively go and engage to get your mana back. It's not a passive regen. You have to manually go and fight for that mana regen, but once you do, you are back to full. You can keep going and going and going. This on top of the crafting system are the two of the best ways that I like with the potential mana system issues. What about a health for FP weapon art or something? Add a passive regen ring and make infusion regions faster than a tick per 3 seconds, so you get it, but on a few downsides. The health for FP weapon art, for anybody that isn't familiar, is there is a item in Sekiro that basically does the same thing. You cut your cheek, you get some stuff for that. Decreases your health, increases your amount of abilities. It's very, very good. Very interesting. I would not be surprised if something like that exists in Elden Ring. We haven't seen it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is there. Also, regen rings, infusions. Those all could be possible solutions as well. FromSoftware isn't shy for having regen rings, both for health and FP, so I wouldn't be surprised if one of those rings exists in this game as well. I'd love to see mana regen, but I'm not sure how they would make it balanced with everything surrounding it. That's what this whole conversation's been about. It is a very fine-tuned thing, and it seems like for the most part they're playing it a little bit safer with how they're doing the mana system. It's bringing back the blue flask. You are going to need to divvy between magic flask and health flask. Very much Dark Souls 3 in the way that it is covering mana, but it also is making it so that FP costs seem to be a lot lower, and you get a lot more FP through each blue flask drink. So it's the same, but it's improved, which is honestly what most of Elden Ring seems to be, is all of the other games but improved, which has me so excited. Passive regen would be great. The primary reason I never do magic builds is a lack of regen. One idea could be to implement passive regen in a way that would have minimal abuse potential. As an example, regen doesn't start before 15 seconds after last attack/hit, and regen halts if you sprint or dodge. Or maybe have a gesture type thing where you sit down and kneel and regen over time, but leaves you very vulnerable to visceral attacks, so using it mid-combat would be risky. Might not be perfect, but at least spellcasters would have the ability to regen between fights. I've seen this and a few others that kind of wanted a system similar to what Skyrim did, where when you're out of combat, both your stamina and your magic regen super duper fast. We do have that system as far as the stamina goes in Elden Ring, where unless you're in combat, you have infinite stamina to do whatever you need to do. It's very, very neat in that regard, but they did not implement it into the FP system. And I believe PvP is the reason for this. With these items that allow you to teleport out of a fight as an invader, it would effectively make it so that if you had a heal spell, you could perpetuate fights forever unless somebody was able to burst you down. And nobody really wants that in the invasion scene. They don't want the fights to go on any longer than they really need to. So I believe that's probably the reason, unless they made it so that phantoms didn't get this benefit and it was only a host benefit, which in that case would be a nerf to invaders again, which FromSoftware isn't shy of doing. But passive regen, maybe. At least make it better than Simple Infusion, but not as busted as it is in Cinders. Simple Infusions were absolutely terrible, and I don't like how FP as a whole was handled in vanilla Dark Souls 3, as it hurts the early game for casters. Alternatively, instead of a passive regen, I think trying it with a dealing damage and kills would be a better idea. And yes, I agree. As people kept bringing up more and more stuff, I am moving further and further away from having passive regen be the goal for Elden Ring. And I'm almost kind of glad that they didn't have a passive regen system in the network test, and I hope that it stays that way. My tune has completely shifted away from a passive regen system, but I am embracing more of these alternate forms of FP regen, whether it's having some way of every attack you do builds up your FP a little bit, every enemy you kill builds up your FP a little bit, or having the crafting system be the source of FP regen and regrowth. I think those are all very viable ways and more engaging ways than just having the bar slowly increase over time. But to counter that idea of mine, FP regen would be a great thing to have in general for PvE or PvP. It can be implemented by making a ring that gives a decent amount of FP that is slightly more than a simple infusion. It can also be naturally implemented by tying it to attunements. You don't get FP regen if you only have like 10 attunement. You get FP regen when you have 15 attunement and up, and it increases the amount of regen and higher your attunement is. There's an Ashen Estus system. It should not be tied to normal Estus. I don't understand why they'd force you to split between Estus and Ashen. They can both have their own pool. It would give more exploring to do now that to find those Ashen Estus shards. Unfortunately, they are tied together. The flask shards or whatever you're going to be using are going to be tied together in that regard. I think this is fine. I think they have enough scope and alternate ways that FP regen could be implemented that they don't need to have them split up. Also, I really did enjoy the attunement, which is now called Mind, by the way, where once you hit a certain threshold in Mind, you would start getting a slow passive regen. I think this is neat, but it still opens up the issues with the PvP scene, which I know that isn't the primary scene of the game. PvE would be, but it does open up an issue in that regard. Lastly, they have moved attunement slots away from the Mind stat. Mind is exclusively increasing your blue bar, so it's not as much a magic stat as it is an overall combat stat. Mind being your knowledge for being able to execute these skills or spells and being able to do them more. From what I understand, the attunement slots are actually going to be items that you find throughout the game that will increase your attunement slots, giving you more reason to go out and search. So I think that's really neat. I think it gives non-magic users more of a reason to go into the Mind stat. It's basically the same as going into the stamina stat at this point, just in a weapon art variety. And it doesn't feel like you're wasting the points because it has the attunement slots tied to it. So with the early game as well, like I was saying earlier, it does seem like the costs for spells and stuff are lower. The amount of blue you get back is higher. So I think they have genuinely been thinking about how to make the magic system, especially early game, more viable overall. But that is just my opinion. I am done with this video. Thank you very much for coming out and watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you want to be featured in one of these videos moving forward, we do comment videos pretty regularly if a video has a good conversation going on underneath it. So feel free to comment under any video that you're interested in. It might get a comment video like this in the future. But until then, Crew, much love. Bye-bye.